morning.
Morning, how are you?
Okay. How are you?
Pretty good.
I think Erin will be trying to join us. I don't know if she'll be able to use this with a phone, like I said.
Okay.
But I'll be on camera in a moment, as usual.
Yeah.
But
No
I'm
problem.
here.
I've never used the phone function on this, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah, the Skype version of it is not great, so. Anyways. So welcome to the meeting. We have, if you're joining us on YouTube, welcome. I know a lot of you catch up asynchronously, so I'll try to make this very easy to follow here. We had a research meeting earlier this week. It was a sort of a touching base of people. Rashab was there, and Jesse, and Daniela, and myself. And so we had a good discussion about that. The recap was that we were planning out different things to do. We have our submissions sheet, and then we also have our we have other things that we can do. We can use our own sort of approaches, and we have some software, and I'll talk about some of that soon in the meeting. But we also have, using other platforms, other approaches. So we've talked about using agent-based modeling approaches. And Rashab also said that OpenAI has a lot of tools that we can use for conducting different types of studies. So if you want to conduct a study that it involves, some sort of, maybe like something like reinforcement learning or an agent-based modeling study, there are tools out there that we can use. And certainly, we've talked about a couple of them, but there are many more out there that we might use. So those are sort of our two-pronged approach, or the two options that we have for doing studies and putting out things for conferences and papers. So, and then and I'll go into the Slack channel in a minute. We also had some engagement in Slack. Erin was there, Daniela was there in Slack. And I think Zora, who just joined us, he made a couple comments. So, welcome to everyone who's new in the Slack. Congratulations for engaging in the Slack. I think that's an important part of our lab here is the ability to work in a Slack-like environment, to have like this platform where we can like bring up stories and bring up points and talk about them asynchronously. So let's see, I'm going to do the Slack review first. Let me share my screen. My screen visible? Okay.
I think so.
All right. So this is our Orthogonal Lab Slack once again. I think Brain Organoids has a couple things in it. There's some paper announcements and some. Here's a worldwide neuro presentation on the coming age of neural stem cells. So that might be interesting to some people. I know this is maybe our Slack population isn't their area of expertise, so maybe a little difficult to get into this channel, but I recommend that everyone in the Slack get into this channel, because a lot of our Slack denizens are not focused on, they're not trained in molecular biology, cell biology. They're usually more like CogSci people or neuro people or AI people. So, but this is maybe worth your time, and there definitely is. We'll see connections between AI and biology at this level that are, coming up. People are doing different, really exciting things with them. So Bradenburg vehicles, nothing there really. I think I put a link to something in here. I don't know what that is exactly, but calls for involvement, CGS group. That's not new. I did post a blog post in here in the Cognition Futures channel Jesse put something on Adam Safran's talk on on embodiment. I think this goes back to around the time of the EI workshop, and then this other stuff that we talked about last week. Conference materials is not there. Cybernetics, nothing new there really. Actually, Jesse raised a question. I wonder what Norbert Wiener would advise people to study these days. There's been this continual sort of push by people to form, and this is an interesting story. There's always been this push to form interdisciplinary programs. This has gone back to probably about the time that cybernetics started, where you had a lot of things going on in different fields, and there was a need to bring them together. You needed things like the Macy conference, but you also needed training grounds for people to learn, how to do this, maybe from the start of their career, instead of, going out and joining up with people in an ad hoc way. So, there were a lot of that's how the Santa Fe Institute started, actually, was that you had this need for complexity theorists, or to train complexity theorists to have a home for this type of work that wasn't really present anywhere else.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about the Santa Fe Institute in that sense. Let's see if I can get. I'm looking for the number again, so I can send it to Erin.
If you go to the let's see, I think it's more actions, or no, invite people. You go to the invite people tab.
Okay. All right. Let's see if that works.
All right. So why don't I keep going, and we'll maybe come back to the Santa Fe thing in a bit here. So yeah, this is nice. The data. Oh, so this data science ML channel has been renamed from data science. So just trying to be more inclusive in the title. This is a channel if you're interested in things that are more, straight ahead, like machine learning, data science education, and that sort of stuff would go in here. I don't think we have anything new there. Nothing new there. Ethics, Society, and Tech. So we have. Actually, this is where Erin was contributing and talking about some things. Let's see, where did we start off with this? I think this actually is from last week. It's hard to know when the week starts for us. But yeah, I think it's Sunday. There's this conference, EAAMO, which is, I don't know what that is exactly. I put it on the list. And then we have, so this is where Erin sort of was talking about linguistics, and we have Erin here.
Yes, I made it.
Oh, hello. Well, I can hear you now. Hello.
Hi, thanks for letting me join you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Am I muted?
No, I can hear you too.
Okay.
I'm just trying to be polite.
Oh, okay. All right. Hello. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Yeah. So, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, Erin. Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Erin. I'm interested in a variety of things, and I know Jesse Parent from a few years ago, and he mentioned that from our conversations I might be interested in looking at your AI ethics document, and I was, and it was really cool, and I'm just grateful to sort of be allowed to talk with you all, and yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, welcome. Thank you. That's a good introduction. We actually were talking about your Slack messages here on, on language and linguistics, and on sort of the approach of development and some other things. So I thought those were really insightful comments. Let's see.
Yeah,
I think that's in general.
it's tough because we are using the screen, and I won't be able to see that. But just to kind of give you a bit of an overview, like a lot of times at the start of meetings, we kind of go over what some recent, like, very accessible updates from what happened over the last week. And so we're going through our Slack channel, which you know about, and we literally just got to the part where you were talking about your contributions and the comments on the ethics stuff. So it was nice. Good time for you to show up.
Okay, I'll go over there and try and follow along. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh no, it's fine. You can talk here too. It's just.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we did. Was there any else in the Slack part?
Oh well, yeah. I'm kind of going through this. I think this is the main one that I wanted to cover. So, yeah, we talked about. We were talking about some of the stuff with. Reminds me of the discussions on autism that behavioral psychology teams have. How literal are we? Are we being understood by the client with autism with other interpretations? Are there... another issue we're likely to have as an English-speaking society if we decide to frame the developmental of AI as competition with other societies. So that there are so many ways to say one idea, and that one way can have a distinct and sometimes opposite meanings in English. Yeah, sarcastic it means no, whereas blooming English is a very accessible overview of some of the developmental of the way. So this was talking about like some of the things you have to think about when you're talking about development and some of the things that people are talking about in some other fields. Our languages change our thinking viewpoint and the way we format our thoughts. So linguists probably are under-consulted. And then we had some... Jesse said, one of the points of discussions come up in my own quest to understand what happened to cognitive science and also AI as the funding of linguistics programs has changed. Now this is somewhat paired with the focus on symbolic AI, which is currently somewhat out of fashion. Of course, we've talked about that in our meetings. And then we have some other things to follow up on that. And I commented that there are different ways that people are approaching development. And we talked a little bit about that. We actually, Erin pointed out a couple of approaches. She pointed out, I think, the Piaget approach of genetic epistemology, which I actually got some papers up. I pulled them up, and I'm going to present them later in the meeting. So that was a very good discussion. It's, I really can't, narrate the whole discussion, but basically you can find it in the channel here. It's split between ethics and society in the general channel. So, the ethics and society has been very active. We have a couple of different points Jesse's posted on here. A couple of articles, so he's actually talking about the next steps in the ethics and society project here. So he's setting it up so that they're leading with the Google story about the Google stuff that's been going on. And so I'm glad to see this is coming together. This is the thing, Kohlberg's stages of moral development and Piaget's genetic epistemology. So she mentioned this, and I actually downloaded this paper. We'll talk about this paper and another paper as well on that topic. And then here's another, this paper, I think, too, or this is the same paper, but she was quoting it. So you'll find this conversation in the Ethics, Society, and Tech channel. So very good, Erin. Thank you for that. And then Jesse's fleshing out the slides and Jesse can give us an update on this later. So that's that channel, and that was pretty active. I don't see very much in some of the other channels. A couple things here and there. There's a online session, events, news. I don't think that's for Energy Principle. Doesn't really have anything in it. Frontier maps, there was this graphic that Jesse posted. Statistics, it's this meme where you have society looking at the wall. Computer scientists are projecting machine learning against a wall. And people are like, artificial intelligence. and it's just machine learning. This is Cream Car, who's on Twitter. It's a takeoff on a popular meme, but I think that's been a criticism of machine learning, is it's just basically, like wormed over statistics and regression, which is, I mean, it does a lot, you can do a lot of amazing things with machine learning, but people sometimes take it, they reify it, or they make it into this thing that it's not. So,
yeah, it's kind of a take on, like, the cave. I forgot. I didn't talk about it, but like was it Plato, the cave? Like the old school thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, projecting this image and then kind of making fun of everything that we would do now is sort of like, oh, it's artificial intelligence and it's machine learning, or is it statistics, or is it regression? And it's sort of like how the term artificial intelligence has just become this thing that is, who can really say what it is right now?
Right.
Depending on who you ask and how much they want to talk about it. So, yeah.
So,
I don't know any other.
So I think the general channel we just kind of went through the general channel a bit, and the only other thing in that channel was that I posted a blog post, a follow-up to the, I don't know if I talked about this last week, but there's a follow-up to the EI workshop. This is on physical intelligence, so there was a session on physical intelligence, and I went back and I looked, and, it's actually like a kind of a rich, an area that's fertile, for further development. So you have a lot of, physical intelligence is basically where you have the standard embodied view of intelligence, where you have the body and the brain and the environment, but you're thinking about it in terms of like things that are physical, like physical forces, or like physical movements, or like looking at the body itself as sort of a source of information, and it's so the people have like kind of talked about this in a way that's it's not real. There's some people have proposed principles, people, including myself, actually. People have like kind of gone through this area and tried to like come up with this idea. It's not really artificial intelligence like we do in neural networks, where we just have the network and we have an output. It's definitely embodied, but there's more to it than that. There's like, biomechanics you might bring into it. You might bring into things that don't even have a brain but have a morphology, like swimming swimming particles, or sometimes proteins suspended in water columns. Those are all sort of like in this milieu of ideas. And so I encourage you to read the post, because you'll get a sense of what the problem is, hopefully, and then maybe we can discuss it a little bit more. And Jesse said that there's going to be so much derivative from these topics. So yeah, I agree. I think the EI workshop, there's going to be, we'll follow up on it like we followed up on the stuff with, NeurIPS and the main conference. So that'll be good. I don't think there's anything else much in here for this week. So, all right, so yeah, definitely we had a pretty interesting week asynchronously. Let me unshare my screen now. Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's our Slack update. Any comments or questions about that?
Bradley, was one of the words that you said visual intelligence? Did I hear that correctly?
Physical intelligence. So it's
and
like
then what
physics.
was the
other? Like in what way? Where was that? In what part of the conversation?
Okay, I might have heard you say physical once, but misunderstood the word. I thought physical the rest of the time. Okay.
Yeah, it's just physical.
I thought there was another adjective.
I don't think so. Yeah. I did talk about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I did talk about neural networks, and it's sort of this disembodied output, which is, and of course in the paper that we wrote on artificial neural networks and biological neural networks, we kind of point that out, that there's, in artificial neural networks, there's a missing piece of embodiment. So, with biological neural networks, they pretty much exist hand in hand with some sort of body or some sort of output to muscles or something. And so it's, in physical intelligence actually deals with that explicitly. It says that you have muscles, that muscles actually do a lot of computation, that there's a lot going on there. And so it's really, embodiment is a necessary condition there, as opposed to like, with a neural network, an artificial neural network, you can analyze a bunch of images. So you can get you can do visual processing on the images. You can get like segment pieces of the image. You can classify the images, but there's no body. There's no, movement of the agent itself through the world. So it's limited in that way.
Yeah.
There wouldn't even be anything like a sensor, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, you could add sensors to
it. Or does it specifically have to be organic?
Oh, for physical intelligence?
Yeah, does it have to have some organic component like the proteins in the water, or could it just be something like a piezoelectric sort of like, like you can sense sound or movement or pressure?
Well, that's the idea of physical intelligence, actually, is it transcends those two. So it's like you might have like robotic systems where there's no biological component. And in fact, maybe even no brain. One of the examples is a passive dynamic walker, which is where you have these inverted pendulums, and people have used them in robotics to simulate bipedal walking. So like, when you have walking like this, you can simulate that using just like an inverted pendulum with no brain, no neural control or anything, and it's actually pretty stable. Now you can take that and you can say, okay, well, we also have sensors on board this inverted pendulum, so we can use some sort of like, computational processing of the sensor data, or we can even have something that's organic, like a protein or some sort of like, very simple multicellular organism that moves around, but they don't have a brain. Or you can have something that has a brain, and it's doing some processing, but its body is a major part of its cognition. So I mean, there are all these different categories. The idea of physical intelligence is to bring all those things together and say there's this common type of intelligence that's unifies them all. So it's a very ambitious research program in that sense. You have a lot of things going on, like, you have to derive a really high level set of principles, and that's sort of the idea. It goes well beyond like a standard, like, some people try to define intelligence as a parameter G, but the problem with that, of course, is that that's not terribly predictive of a lot of things that are going on in intelligence. Like, we have a lot of things, it's very hard. It's almost like defining life. It's almost impossible to give a really tight definition that includes everything you need.
Well, thank you. I'll look into it.
Yeah. I see Krishna's here.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Krishna.
Hi, Jesse. Hi, Bradley.
Hello.
I was also going to just to kind of reiterate it, because I don't, for someone who can't see the screen, in the general chat, Bradley made the link in synthetic daisies, and synthetic daisies is sort of our lab. It's sort of like, well, it's basically Bradley's like blog, and it's related to a lot of topics in the lab, and it's been there for a long time. So there's a post in synthetic daisies about what we just talked about in terms of physical intelligence, and that's in general. But also, like, just to kind of do a really quick mention of this, and I don't know if we want to, I don't really know what we're going to kind of be covering today, so I imagine we're not going to be doing a big deep dive on this, but the logo in general, the EI International Workshop, that's the International Workshop on Embodied Intelligence, and that's something that, is it last week? Is it already last week or 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, we were at that. Like Bradly, myself, and also Stefan actually presented very simple flash talks. We presented at the conference, at the workshop, and a couple of people in the lab were there too. And it's actually quite an interesting thing. It's sort of like a modern day, I said like a modern day Macy's conference where a lot of people from soft robotics, hardware, software, philosophy, cognitive science, biology, neuroscience, like a lot of different fields of conference. Yeah. And so that event that we were at inspired a bunch of things. I'm kind of writing an article myself. Bradly just did a post on physical intelligence in the Synthetic Daisies blog for the lab. So when I say a lot of stuff's going to be coming from this discussion or whatever, like I'm referring to that workshop, and I've had a lot of things that come from that, and many of the recordings, or many of the videos and discussions were recorded on there. So I think a lot of people in the lab will be going back and kind of checking out what happened. So just to give a bit more broad context, that's sort of that's the zoomed out context of things. So.
Yeah, we also have the Open Science Framework. We have a collection of talks and things. So we're putting, if you do a blog post on this, I'd like to put it in that collection, as like a PDF or something, and then we'll have like a reading list. Maybe like 6 months down the road, we can have one place to go for this. We also have versions of the shared notes document, which for maybe Krishna and Erin, we do these shared notes documents where we, like if we do a virtual event, we'll maybe take screenshots or put notes in this document, and multiple people in the lab can use it at the same time. Whatever your thoughts are at the time, you can put them in, and then you can consult this later for if you want to write an article on it, or if you want to write a paper, or whatever you want to do, even just to revisit things 6 months later to refresh your memory. I know, like, there are a lot of concepts I hear somewhere, and then 6 months later I come in and say, well, I don't really remember that very well. I need a refresher. So we've been talking about this we've been talking about this for a long time, and this is our sort of solution for this. And actually, speaking of these kind of conferences, I've attended a lot of these kind of conferences in the past, and I have notes on these conferences. These are from like many years ago, some of them, but I have like this note collection, and I need to bring it up. I might actually put some notes on some other conferences and make them available to people in the lab if you're interested. I mean, these are kind of...
I would love that. That would help me to catch up so much. Please do.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to also say, could you put the OSI link maybe in the chat here or in general again? Because I have been around it so many different ways, but I also feel like I wonder if that would be a good way to kind of store some collective, like almost like a package of stuff. And I don't, like, obviously we've done that with like Brainwave vehicles and some other things in the past, I think, and other things in the lab, but I'm not really familiar with the open science framework and like actually using it. So I want to do more with that, I think.
Yeah, so let me actually do this real quick. I was going to do this later, but I'll do this now. And I have to share my screen here. So this is something I talked to Stefan earlier this week, or I think yesterday, about this. So this is the OSF framework. This is Open Science Framework, and the idea here is you can actually create projects in this platform, osf.io, and you register and you can create a project, and you can connect all sorts of things in this. You can connect GitHub components. You can connect. You can upload files. You can store them in an organization like this, and you can put tags on them. And the benefit of doing this is you can add contributors. The benefit of doing this is you can generate a DOI, which makes your project citable. So say you want to have a project on your software package, or you have a group project that you want to make public. You don't want to just cite the paper. You want to cite a bunch of papers. that you've done, or a bunch of activities, maybe talks, blog posts, you would create a project here, and you can go through the steps on, you know, how to create a project. You give the project a name, and then you can put in all your elements here. So you have components here, you have recent activity, and one of the things you can do is have these documents. So this is one example of a document. If you click on something like a PDF, it'll render the PDF, the current version, and then you can download it. And so this is actually, let me go back to this one. This is the Embodied Intelligence Workshop presentations. So this is the link, and I'll put it in the chat.
Now, if you post something like on ResearchGate, which also creates a DOI, could you just transfer it here too?
Well, yeah, you could mint DOIs in ResearchGate. This is more for like working with, you can work with groups of people, so you can give multiple people permissions, and you can do things like, you can actually do version control editing in this, although it's not as good as GitHub. You can do all sorts of things with this. It's like maybe one step above ResearchGate in functionality for like doing collaborative stuff. Like if you have a bunch of people want to add to this repository. So, you know, it's not really, ResearchGate is more like just publishing things. Yeah. And then if you give it a DOI, it's static. In this case, if you give it a DOI, you can update it, and it has the same DOI. So this is the one for our presentations. We have actually some video presentations, shared note document presentations, Jesse, myself, and Stefan, and then some blog posts. And then this week I talked to Stefan about, so in 2019 he was a Google Summer of Code student, and he created the software called BraGenBrain. And this is during that summer we had at least 3 different people working on instantiations of this developmental Bratenberg vehicle. So the idea was that there was a proposal that was put out. Let's create developmental Bratenberg vehicles, and we'll do it in any way that you propose. And so I had, actually Jesse was in that group too, and he had proposed a version of this. So, you know, you might use something like genetic algorithms, you might use something like Hebbian learning. They're all different ways you can do this. And so we had 3 different approaches that were worked on over that summer. You know, they were really interesting. And so Stefan is wanting to continue his side of that work. We actually published a preprint on this, the Developmental Bratenberg Vehicles preprint, which is, I think it's in this, I don't know if it's in here, but it's, you know, it's a pretty unique approach to this. Anyways, this is the software that he created for Google Summer of Code, and he wants to start doing like open source software development of this platform. So, you know, opening it up to people and getting them to contribute different things. The suite itself is like, if you download it now, it's like, you know, this, you know, it generates some vehicles in an environment. It's a very simple 2-dimensional virtual environment. You have these little vehicles, and then the brains inside of them evolve. You can evolve them with genetic algorithms, and then you know, depending on, you run it, and then you evaluate the different vehicles for what their brains look like. So, you know, it's the problem we had with the approach that he did in the summer was that we ran up against a hard limit of how big these networks could be. So you can't have these massive networks. You can have networks of about maybe 20 nodes maximum, but that's good. That's not too, I mean, that's something that we can analyze for one thing. But, you know, so there are a lot of issues that we need to create in terms of like, you know, how do we make these networks bigger and also have them computationally tractable? How do we, you know, evaluate the networks? We came up with some metrics, but there are more to be made up with, you know, more to sort of investigate. how do you put it into an environment? I think Stefan in his talk talked about spatial cognition as a benchmark for testing the performance of these vehicles, and there's a lot there that we can explore. So I show you the open source framework link because that's a good way to have, like, if you have a project and you want to make it public and make it available to people in one place, that's a good way to do it. But also to mention that we're going to be kind of trying to get people to encourage people to develop this platform a bit more, and we'll see where that goes.
This is so cool. I'm so glad you invited me to be part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So Bradley, can I ask, did Stefan and you find that, or Stefan himself find that the limiting factor was computing power, or was it something inherent in the system? Like, what was the issue with getting us above 20?
Oh, it's just because when you have, like, it's a network, so when you have, like, you know, a couple of neurons, you know, you're building a matrix, of a connectivity matrix that's rather small. Once you get above 20, the connectivity matrix gets so big because it's a real-time thing that it kind of just, you know, it's behaving in real time, so you're constantly updating the matrix, and if it's really big, then that's a problem, you know, especially when you have multiple vehicles. What was that?
So is it computing power, or is it latency, or what is it?
I think computing power was the issue that we had.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because you do have, in a way, it's open source, and you are trying to learn with it. I'm not sure how much you'd want to apply this, and you'd have to go through some, you know, protections with it, but when I was teaching at the school district, we would have loved having something like that. So we would have wanted you to use our computing power, and there's tons of computing power across the U.S. in classrooms. So anyway, tangent. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We were thinking about how to make these platforms, like, you know, I think using some of this stuff for education is, of course, in the mission of our group, but also I think more generally they should look more deeply into the, you know, how to get it in the hands of people, like, you know, students and other groups of people who are interested in learning about computation and things like that. But
well, teachers have so much computing power, they don't know what to do with it, so you could benefit in the development, hopefully, like they did with that project where, you know, scientists are allowed to use part of your computing power that you're not using. There's some sort of system like that for Stanford or something. Yeah.
The SETI at Home, or there's some other ones, not just SETI at Home, but there's another astrophysics project.
Like that.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and of course the issue though is that it needs more development. So to really make it like something that people are going to be able to use. Yeah. So, but that's a good. I think that's a good goal, is to like get it in the hands of people who might really do some interesting things with it. And yeah. Did you want to give us an update, Jesse? I'm done with the OSF thing and the BraGenBrain.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I guess we have sort of like, I'm trying to think how to do something. What do we want to talk about for the rest of the meeting? I could do an update on the ethics stuff. I could do an update on, I don't know if you want to talk about anything about the, and you left about the embodiment stuff. I have a few things to say about that. A few updates on Princeton. And they wanted to paper later. But we have, you know, time. So I don't know what else. And I don't know if Krishna wanted to present anything too. So I kind of know what's the agenda for the rest of the meeting.
Okay, so the agenda, from my perspective, I'd like to go over the submissions a little bit, just to make sure we're on, you know, updated on that. And then I have some papers to review, but that'll take about maybe 35 minutes. Krishna, did you have anything you wanted to present today, or?
I see Krishna's unmuted, but I don't hear anything yet. Oh, I think he just dropped out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we could, yeah, why don't we go, like, do both, like, do the embodiment update and then the ethics update, and then, you know, we can do it in about maybe 25 minutes, 30 minutes,
yeah.
and then, yeah.
I think I'll circle around. I think the
Krishna wants to say something.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, I guess my call dropped.
Okay.
So, no, I don't have something to present. But yeah, talking about the last week, it was really crazy. Yesterday I was, discussing something with Dick on his fish ladder project, and I have to make graphs for his new paper. Then I did the ENNBN paper, and it was really awesome. And I was working on the super resolution thing that I will be, that is to be presenting in the Envision conference. So I'd like to hear about that from Jesse, that what's going on with the Envision conference. And yeah, I was making the GSOC proposal for digital microsquare, so it kept me busy the whole week. So that's about me.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. Sounds good.
Yeah, it was really crazy. The previous week was really crazy. I was, busy with a lot of stuff was on my plate. So
yeah. So Jesse, okay, yeah. Sorry, I didn't. I just wanted to see if Krishna had something, but yeah.
I think I'll start with Envision stuff. I don't know. Have you heard back from? I don't know if Krishna heard back from Envision. I got a little bit of an update about some of the different things that this is the first time they're doing a virtual setup, and also one where it's sort of like as diversified about it. For people who don't know, I think Erin has applied to Envision, so I kind of another person that I should have dragged into it. So I feel proud of myself that I've gotten people involved in Envision. I guess Krishna applied. I don't know if his research talk was accepted or not. I think he's implying that it was. If so, congratulations. Not everybody has gotten accepted, and from I asked a little bit about some things, and where I'm trying to find things here. Excuse me. My talk was accepted as a as a research talk, and I think for some other things like lab overview, there was where did it go? It was kind of a sense of there will be I think the research was mostly for students specifically, and also kind of Envision limited a bit. So I don't know how many people really are getting to be able to do that. But there's also there will be networking sessions, and Slack and the newsletter are ways that they potentially do what was aimed for in that talk.
Yeah.
From what I understand. And Maya said you could reach out to her specifically, like either through her email or in Slack too.
Okay.
So I think there's still potential to do the kind of overview if we wanted to do that.
Okay.
So that's not always lost with that.
Well, yeah.
And also for those who haven't been to Envision before, in previous instances of it. I might try to pull this up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also wish I could you know what? I might try to do it like this. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of it. I'll look different and do it this way. So I'm going to try to share my screen and show this whole window over here. Oh, I think this is the wrong one.
Yeah.
Here we go.
There we go.
So I think you can see this here. This is like the main, you know, what the conference website looks like. And what I'm going to try to do, because I don't think they have a lot of really good images of what it looked like in the past. Basically, it's a very short 2 or 3 day conference at Princeton. And usually it's held like in November or December. Obviously last year that didn't quite work. So they couldn't really shift it, so they kind of had to just postpone it until the spring of this year, and it's virtual. Applications are still open, so if you know anybody who will benefit from this, let me go. Let's see. Do they have any pictures here? Not really. They're, you know, a little bit, yeah, you can kind of see stuff, and a lot of my, like this is kind of what a lot of it would look a lot like this. Like you go into the Frick Chemistry auditorium thing, you have a lot of people looking at screens, and you have discussions here. So like about half the conference would actually look just like this, where you're kind of sitting here in the stadium, and you have really good discussions. Everybody in this group is like super cool and interesting. These aren't the best. These are actually from, I think, the first conference in 2017, so they haven't really been using Twitter as much, you know, as some people would about it, like me. Like I think I have a bunch of photos somewhere. Can't really see this here. At any rate, I know I can definitely do one, which is this. As some of you know, or may have seen, one of my favorite pictures of all time is actually this. This is you know, Envision 2019, featuring me, Phil Torres, who's an extra study guy, Anson Lim, who's now a lab member, Angela, who's sort of a lab member and kind of wanted to come back into it, Anna, who is a really cool entrepreneurial person. She was like 17 when she came to the conference, and now, you know, she's like doing big things in her own entrepreneurial world. Logan, who is presenting at Envision again. He's listed in like biotechnology. He's working with conduit computing, and he's a really brilliant guy. And Adam, who's kind of a math philosophy guy here in New York as well. So everybody in this picture is like awesome. One of my favorite pictures of all time. That's why I always use it and stuff. And there's just a lot of great things that happen. So normally, what happens? You know what? Since I made this, I'm just gonna do this. Actually, one moment, please.
All right.
I have, because I'm me. Okay, I have saved Envision like a fanboy. I've saved many Envision documents on my GitHub repo for proposals. Like I would, if I get the chance, I would like just print out a bunch of them. But like, you know, like if you're familiar with like small events or things that aren't really heavily taken off the ground, there's sort of like a limited, you know, I don't know, can you see this here? I think so.
Yeah. So
I've created in my proposals on my personal thing, I copied this from GitHub, but like, if you go to my GitHub and the proposal materials repo, I combine everything now into this Princeton Envision one. So here's kind of their current website, but also I saved some stuff from all the past years. So I can kind of show you, like last year, this is kind of what it looked like. If it loads. But this is kind of what you would get handed this at the event, and it was pretty cool. The conference, but at a glance, you know, technologies. But here, like you have a bunch of these breakout sessions and stuff like that, and small rooms, and people focus on different tracks. Like there have been tracks about like my first time at Envision, there was like an entrepreneurial track where people had like a business pitching competition that drew a lot of business people. The next time it was I don't know, more like computer humanities track. And last year, I forget what the tracks were, but they're different kind of groupings of stuff. And I don't think they have many tracks this year because there's like a bunch of. I don't actually know, but basically what you do is kind of have your Friday would be, it's a typical kind of Friday, Saturday, Sunday setup. And your Friday would be your intro, like here. You'd have your intro at Frick Chemistry Laboratory. You'd have an opening session talks. You'd have a dinner. You'd have a networking session, whatever. Saturday, and sometimes you might get started on a project that way. Saturday would be a lot of workshops and specific focus. You have a career fair. And this is what I was actually getting to. Saturday's career fair is sort of probably where the lab presentation overview would be. And I think they're doing something similar to this. I don't know if they call it a networking session or like a virtual career fair. I don't quite know what it's called right now. But this is definitely where an overview would like absolutely fit. And I think they're kind of steering us to that way for what if we want to do. Hey, here's our lab in the most general sense. So there's definitely a place for that. And I've made some connections there. And the best thing about Envision and a lot of conferences like this is not just the main talks and the flow of things, but also just the sidebar, like the people you meet, a really good discussion with outside of the schedule. And virtual kind of loses that a little bit, but it's still possible. Like you can just say, hey, let's talk on, get out of town or on email. So again, Saturdays are kind of this big work day, and then Sunday is sort of the presentation day. Like you present your project, or you present a discussion, or whatever else, and then some other talks, and then a closing talk, and people leave. So that's typically how Envision goes. And I think we're only doing 2 days of it this year, so it's a little bit different. But still, it's a lot of good stuff that's happening there. So on my end, I think we're still going to be trying to do the overview of the lab, and you can either mention that in the Slack. I think you're in the Slack, Bradly. I don't know if you're there if you're not, or anybody else wants to be in the Slack. You can. It's not the most active right now, but it will be when people get there.
Yeah.
So that's what's up with that. I will pretty much do a remixed version of my, like what I presented a little bit at the Embodied workshop, but much more tailored towards Envision's audience. And Envision's audience predominantly will be early career people, like a lot of undergraduates, some graduate students. It is a little bit slanted more towards undergraduate students. However, some of my people who have entered Envision are kind of feel like, oh, well, I'm not an undergraduate student anymore, I don't want to be there. But I'm actually of the opposite opinion, in part because I feel like, especially for things in the Northeast that are actually super accessible, even in terms of like, how am I doing this here? Oh, hold on, sorry. Especially for things in the Northeast, like even though Princeton Envision has this sort of, aura of Ivy League or whatever, it's actually one of the most accessible conferences that I know of. In part because they will pay you, like the amount of they're really good about paying you for travel expenses. Like they've been very generous, and I missed the handoff for one of the payments. Like they went out of the way to mail it to me months later because they had to resolve something on their end, and they still did it. And so there's a really, really good community around meeting people who are concerned about the future or whatever else, and come to this event. So, and we've got people international from Russia and Europe and all over go to it. So it's great, but it's also it's such a fertile ground for people who are concerned about the future in a lot of ways. So that's why I'm a fanboy of it. Okay. I forgot why I went on a tangent, but basically, I will be kind of doing a presentation of Cognition Futures and Frontier Maps, which actually, there's some developments on those fronts that I don't really know how to talk about yet, but I have some very clear visions and aspirations for what I want to do with those things. Because one thing I'll mention very quickly is a tangent and I'll make a tangent into something about the embodiment workshop, but I wanted to ask if anybody has any questions about Envision before I segue.
I don't. I have to work. Yeah, I have to work on the slides. Actually, updating them. I haven't had time so much this week because I've been busy with other things. I'm gonna try to, I guess, do it this week. It's gonna push me because the Envision is next weekend. So
yeah, and it's a really difficult moment because, like, you know, there's the GSOC stuff, and I may not be working with. I don't think I'm going to go in with GSLOC ultimately, but I'm going to try to apply to a few things, and I may apply to DevoWorm, but I also may apply to some other things.
Yeah.
As, you know, a lot's going on there, and but there's Envision, which is not a high bar for me because it's already done. Like, Envision's been done for a while, and I'm very familiar with it. But there's still a lot of New York celebration of the computing stuff, the AI ethics stuff, and I'll talk about that in like 1 or 2 topics from now, and I'll try to keep moving through that. But one thing I would say regarding the Embodied Intelligence workshop, and I just lost what I was doing. There is still the podcast. I don't know if you wanted to do anything with that, Bradley, but that's still open to contributions from what I can tell. I don't know if mine's really going to be accepted into it, but I did do it. And it's an open invitation to those who got accepted for Flash Talks and stuff to kind of participate. And all the big names and whatever kind of have their own segments, I think. But I think we have sort of a, you know, we have an opportunity to participate in. And I did finish that this week. I can't see where am I. I don't know if you wanted to do that or not, though, probably.
I'm still thinking about it. I'm not sure. I might just do. Yeah, I might do one, but I'm gonna have to sit down and think about like scripting it out. And so you just have to like basically give an audio recording of yourself, or how does that work? What's this deliverable?
Yeah, where is all my... Okay, here it is. Alright, I moved my stuff. So, whoops. The deliverable, basically, let's see here. Let's see my stuff again. Okay, I'll mention this in a moment too. I'm going to be applying to this. Where did it go? So basically, here's what I ended up doing. Hadi, he is the one in charge of things, and he emailed him, and I followed up, and I talked to him a little bit. And he's on WhatsApp, but also just email. And he originally said something to the degree of find this anywhere. He originally said basically give you a limit of like, you know, 3 minutes per question or so, and there were 7 questions with an introduction. And I won't obviously play mine here, but the questions were, I just send this yet? Here, I think I can just show this. The questions were this. What is embodied intelligence? Missing pieces? Most inspiring? And so on. And I scripted it a a little bit and then revise. I just revised some because speaking is, speaking about these topics is tough, and mine weren't perfect. And I know, like, some people really try to make their answers really articulate and concise, and I did a little bit of that, but also it was like I wanted to be a little more conversational.
Right.
Like question 7 is really important, and I approached mine from a standpoint of I'm an early career researcher. I'm not a pro. I'm not in grad school yet, but I still wanted to put my voice into it. And I think even just reflecting on these topics is actually really good. And kind of what I would mention in that sense is they've helped me think a lot about frontier maps. Like the event. The event itself, do I have it up here? I don't know if I do. The event itself was quite interesting in terms of just, we talked about it before about it being a bunch of people coming together for different fields, and, here's the website, here's the videos, here's, I think all of our stuff is being updated here. As soon as it can be, our presentations will be here. Some of them are here now. Like this is a link actually. So that's cool. You can see a lot of the stuff there, the program, the interviews, and the Discord is there, but I don't think it's too active right now. It's over. So, but as far as frontier maps and such goes, I feel like there's and my responses, a lot of these things were quite, I don't know. I came up against those questions in different ways, and I think embodied intelligence. One of the things I said about what is embodied intelligence was sort of like, I mentioned it in discussion of the. Do I have this here? Yeah, I mentioned it. This is cool. I didn't even plan this transition, but it's here. I mentioned the. I mentioned embodied intelligence as a framework, as an idea, as a lens to look at it, and that was kind of a definition or more methodology or an approach, and that led to a lot of really interesting discussion in this panel here with Brock after Brock's talk, and Brock was kind of pushing for the idea that. Yes, morphological computation, memory, ALU, but also like intelligence requires the combination of multiple computational paradigms. And so I attempt between that and my comment and thinking about some things that Carl Kristen was saying in some of his talks in the podcast. I guess I would say in a very light sort of preview sense, I think it's a really interesting way to look at the integration of many different streams of information, and also combining that with constraints and embodiment. Like in terms of Adam's talk, one of his ideas was sort of using embodied priors to gain inferential leverage, and I'm glad because that actually is what I tried to kind of. I mentioned him very briefly, like, yeah, I like this idea, and I'm glad I kind of said it. Pretty much what this says, so I probably said it, the right way. But it's very much a sense of, there's this physical structure that affects your constraints, your limitations, your movements if you're engaging with the world, and that affects that inherently, creates some confines for the affordances, for what you can do, for what you can experience, for what you can, how you can interact with the world, and I feel like that's an important part of things. So again, I'll leave it at that, and hopefully mine will be, put into the workshop somewhere. They are starting to do things in this series, I noticed. So it, I don't know if I'll be posted with anybody. It might be like a sidebar thing, but that's still pretty cool to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would encourage, Bradly and Stefan to do this if they want to.
Okay. The time limit in the email, it said submit by March 20th. Is that a hard deadline? I assume not.
Everything that I did is after that. Like, I've been talking to Hadi after that, and I mean, I don't know if it's. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, Hadi said to me, "Hey, you know, we're still open to this and voices if you want to submit with it." Right. I think I was going to be out like ahead of the conference. So, but you know, if you want to do it, you can, or you can reach out to him and see what he said.
Why don't you forward that email to myself and Stefan?
Yeah.
So we have that.
Yeah, I will do that. Okay. So that's pretty much it. There's a whole bunch of things from the embodiment conference that could still be talked about, but in light of our time constraints, we can move on. So I think, unless there's any other questions or things, I'll just quickly go over what's going on with the New York, the ethics team, basically. So any other remarks before that? Questions or whatever? Okay. So as far as the ethics team, the update is, you know, this is all due this week. You know, we're going to be presenting. I forget if it's Friday or Saturday. So we're kind of like wrapping it up now and putting it there. I have heard from a lot of people this week. I've heard from Angela, kind of reached out. I don't think she'll be participating directly, but kudos to Angela for kind of participating indirectly and facilitating some things in general, and maybe not on this project, but you know, thanks for that. Shruti reached out. Krishna has been here. Erin has been involved. Min has been working on stuff. So I appreciate all that. Daniela has, been looking at things, and we're kind of wrapping up things, I think, conceptually, but also at this point, you know, I would really like to have essentially the slides fleshed out by the end of this weekend. That's going to be my goal. I wanted to have a little bit more time this week so that we could just do it and kind of do a quick run through here. But my like super abridged version of that run through is going to be you can see a lot of the comments are popping up here and things are happening, so that's good. My quick run through the presentation is going to look a little bit like this. Like, okay, we'll start off, and this slide with the timings won't be here. But what I'm going to do is dive into Google as the starting point for the presentation, seeing as how we still really only have like 3 or 5 minutes for an introduction, and then, I don't know, 10-ish minutes, 10 plus minutes for our topical areas, and then a little bit for conclusion. That's still the overall framework of things. But I think I'm going to start with having to Google and go through this article a little bit to kind of set the stage. And by this article, I mean this article, which honestly I think is a really terrible. I don't like this title, but it's clickbait, and you know, it's a popular article. However, the content is really good, and it kind of starts off with a story about, you know, Tina Jabru, who we mentioned many times. You know, it gives a good background about her reaching out and kind of saying, you know, she reached out to this collaborator and so on and so forth, and she's like, oh, I don't work on this, but we could flesh this out, and you know, they settled on something, and they worked on a paper, and it easily came out in terms of the ACM competence, fairness, accountability, and transparency, which is a major component in sort of AI ethics and trying to move towards quality AI. And the paper was on the dangers of stochastic parrots. Can language models be too big? And you know, this is a very good explanation. The phrase stochastic approach refers to the idea that these enormous models are putting into the words without truly understanding what they mean, similar to how the parrot learns to repeat things it hears. And, you know, in so many words, it goes on to say, you know, there was some... Google's kind of saying, oh, well, you didn't follow our review process, blah, 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 and was kind of giving a grief about it. And Timnet allegedly said something like, well, if you don't accept my demands for how to handle this, I'm going to consider resigning. And Google said, well, okay, yes, your resignation. So it was kind of like, and it's kind of funny because Google Assistant on my phone just thinks I'm talking about it right now. I'm not. No, we're not bad enough in Google at all. Don't worry. You know, there was some disparity, and basically Timnet was left the company in an unceremonious way. But why? Like, why does this really matter? And you know, this article does a pretty decent job of explaining how you know, there are very few laws regulating AI right now, and it's quite tough because we're kind of left to these sort of companies and academic institutions often make their own rules about what is and isn't okay when developing increasingly powerful software. And, you know, the co-led AI ethics team, and I'm kind of quoting from an article if you can't see it here. But the crisis that Google shows the tensions that can arise when academic, or I would say, you know, industrial research is conducted within a company whose future depends on the same technology that's under examination. And that's kind of what one of the major, like, pressure points of the whole situation is. Like, Google, you know, Google was sort of trying to make up these pretty lame excuses, like, oh, you didn't follow our review process, and you wanted to resign. Like, this very, like, poorly handled thing. But the question is, and I would even, how I'm going to kind of frame the answer to this is, and maybe not, I haven't quite figured out if I want to put this next point here or not, but like, Gary Marcus has been fairly openly critical of the establishment in terms of, you know, why deep learning and big data are really entrenched in terms of, you know, what is AI right now. And, you know, this paper from Jabru was critical of deep learning and big data and how it's being used, and Google's kind of reaction to it makes them seem very defensive of, you know, the idea that, hey, deep learning and big data can solve everything, you know, so we're not going to have people on our ethics team that criticize about that. And Gary Marcus is kind of saying, yeah, like, there's such a huge incentive to use big data and deep learning together as the means to solve a lot of things right now. And trying to create innovation along those lines is a tough choice, is a tough sell in some ways. And the article kind of goes on to, you know, yeah, to talk about things. And I say, yes, this is kind of, you know, a smoking gun and you know, mystery and intrigue part of things with Jabru, but also, like, this is not new. Like, there's been multiple issues with Google's AI ethics team, so it's not really just the clickbait title of one person affected so much. It's like, yes, but it's worse than one person. It's quite a, like, this is a major, how do we deal with this? Like, this is just a very visible example, but and you know, this is kind of I don't know. Margaret Mitchell has also, I think was she also released from Google? A few people have been. I don't know if there's anything. But yeah, a lot of outrage. It's a media posted departure. A lot of like back and forth. All honestly since December or November about this. And each month there's kind of new things that come through it. Like, yeah, here. After months of being outspoken on Twitter following Jabru's exit, including tweeting a lengthy internal memo that was heavily critical of Google, Mitchell, who I just mentioned, I saw this tweet, and I was like, what does this mean? She just wrote a tweet saying, I'm fired. And basically she got ousted from Google's ethics team as well. So it's like, there's this, the way things have been handled at Google and all this framing about, for social good and ethics, like it's really, I think this is like kind of the important platform to start from when we talk about what's the issue we're really looking at here. So with that in mind, I'm kind of like, I mentioned restructuring some things towards, I forget where I put it in here. I'm basically thinking of, this may be our main title, but I think the subtitle, or I might do like an updated title, which basically is, is about, which essentially is about how do we make spaces for critical voices in AI ethics. Because a lot of AI ethics frameworks have these big lists. Oh, we're going to reduce our carbon emissions, we're going to be ethical, we're going to include diversity, we're going to have multiple people represented and many stakeholders, and these are sort of lofty things, but it's like, how do we understand the need for essentially critical voices and also create opportunities for that, and how is that's going to be the major lens, I think, that will underlie a lot of the topics that we're looking at, rather than kind of just saying, oh, here's what an ethical framework is, and knowing, it's a slight variation on our original topic, but I think that will be very salient and very also for a conference that's focused on celebration of women in computing, for a conference that's focused on early cultures getting into the field of what are you going to be looking at. I think it's a great way to look at it, and we can still use that lens to look at all these other subtopics. Excuse me, that we're looking at. So I feel like that's kind of going to be, I did a little bit of a rambling version here in my talk, which is much more than 5 minutes, but having a condensed version of what I said, with some key points and some good images as the foundation, and then going into these different topics, a little bit of explanation about ethical framework, and then a little bit of talking about these key things like neutrality. I don't know if Rashad still wanted to work on anything specific, or I don't know if Krishna still wanted to work on anything specifically to excuse me, the feedback talk that he was working on. I know Rashad did mention a few things, but I don't think he's going to be. I think he's doing reinforcement learning more in another way, but we did have an actual conversation about reinforcement learning and ethics. But there's still a few lenses to dive down deeper into that if we want, and I'm kind of going to see what people do with that. So that's kind of where it stands for the time being. I mentioned a while ago the AI Now discussion, and if they're still accepting things, we might submit some short essays to that. That's a whole separate venue and a whole separate thing, but the timing just hasn't been there. So
yeah,
if we get around to it, we'll do that. Because we have we could really create some essays very quickly from this content, which will eventually be put into a manuscript later. But that's kind of where it's at for now.
Thank you for that update. Do we have any comments or questions about that?
I have a comment.
Okay.
When you started talking about Margaret Mitchell, it popped into my head. We've had it's society repeating itself. We had this same issue with, great new computer developments making the derivatives market possible, and a woman literally being tasked with, I'm a speaker. A woman literally being tasked with regulating the derivatives market, which was able to do its work because of advances in computing. So it's really parallel. It's making me laugh. And she had her hands tied when she was going to regulate big business or big money, big banks, big finance. basically sending us off into the recession. So it's just sort of hilarious, and you might even want to reference that briefly in the intro, just as we previously messed up by removing women that we're regulating. It really does send a message to people when we're trying to encourage, especially little girls, to get into STEM and to stay in STEM. All of my kids that were in my tech classes, you know, everyone who was performing well, there were tons of girls. But then when it got up into, there's tons of research showing that they're going to be welcome if they doesn't want to be, you know, they don't want to struggle with their colleagues all the time to just prove that they should be there, that type of thing. So, I mean, this kind of, I mean, who got sent away? The women are getting sent away? The one guy I can think of who got dismissed from Google was sent away because he was saying something he thought would affect them with diversity, or it was blatantly sexist. But did guys that were trying to regulate get sent away? I don't see any of that.
Yeah, it's very much. If you, it would actually be pretty good. I don't really know who you were citing with the person you mentioned. So if you want to mention that in the paper or in Slack or anything, please do so. We'll throw it in there. That's a good point. But it's very much.
And I don't mean intention. I meant more optics. You know, what message does it send to the people that are? You know, I'm not saying that, they're like, get out the women, but.
No, that's exactly right. In the sense of this, Google made such a big fuss about, even the ethics team was sort of a response to problems as it was, and we're going to get Tim Jabru, we're going to get Mark Mitchell, we're going to get these great people in here, we're going to do this, we're going to become leaders and exemplars, and this is how it's handled. And the optics to women, and also the optics to the general public is like, well, you know, if you try to post something that's somewhat critical of what we're doing, and make a paper about it and do a genuine collaboration with other people and present at conference about this, hey, you know, the message being sent is you could be fired, you could be let go unceremoniously, and we're not going to even give you the respect you deserve to have. Like, it's such a indignified way to be released from a company, and that's two major people that it's happened to. Like, you don't go on Twitter and say, hey, I'm fired. You know, like, that's not like great. So the message is not good, and I think having a place to talk about that is, you know, I think that's a very useful and sort of appropriate indignation as the background. Like, hey, we want to talk about AI ethics, but we don't want to just have this sort of you know, it's not going to be this like pie in the sky. Oh, well, we can have this framework and this magical stuff, and it's like, no, here's actually the harsh reality, and we want to speak to that as we're looking at these other topics. I think that's more powerful and more salient, because I think about this conference in that sense of, like, you know, this is a conference really designed at young, early career people. First time research talks are like a big thing at this event, and it's like, hey, you know. You know, it's like the old I wish I could pull it up, the old the Zelda meme of, hey, take this, it's dangerous out there, you might need the sword to like have some knowledge about what's going on, and be prepared and have some, you know, there's positive community around managing it too. So anyway, yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good discussion. Well, I look forward to seeing this week what your the finished product, I guess. And yeah, so you'll be putting, I guess, updates in the Slack. So
yeah, my plan for that, like, this weekend in particular, I will be. Thanks, Krishna. Also, like, Krishna, if you have anything you wanted to contribute about the feedback stuff, please do that. Even just want to mention something in Slack, like, that's still open. But yeah, my plan is kind of by Sunday to have, it may not be totally finished in terms of, like, I'm not going to cut off people's contributions. so don't worry about that. But like, I want to have the slides kind of mapped out in penultimate draft. Is that the right way to say it? Like, not maybe not the final version, but like that's my goal for this weekend. So I'll have that done. Envision on my end is pretty much done, and then we can refine, have some more discussions to tweak things over the next course of the week and make sure everybody sees it. Because I know Min's done a lot of work, but it hasn't quite been materialized in the slides yet. So it's going to be coming together this weekend, and then on everything else. But the ethics team I think it's gone pretty well so far. So thanks everybody, and I'm really glad that Erin's here. I'm really glad that Krishna's here and Shruti's reached out, and it's been fun to do it. I've gotten some other updates from the conference too. Let me really quickly look at my email to see if there's anything I can say about it. Registration. There'll also be a gather town, and I don't know. Like, I think I'm probably going to be the only one registering for the conference. I'll have to pay a little bit to be registered for the conference, but that's fine. And one thing is, because things are quite asynchronous, like if people want to record themselves talking about something, I'd be happy to also play that. So it's not just I don't particularly want it just to be me talking. But if anybody wants to be on camera, present a topic or an idea for a minute or two in one of the segmenting things that we've done, we can talk about that. So feel free. Like, it's hard because we're all like in super different time zones and different. If we're very asynchronous, but like I want to give people the opportunity where if you want to have your a recording or a voice clip or something that you want to say, or I could speak it for you if you want. Or like if you want to do it yourself, there's a lot of ways to do that. So just putting that out there too, and I'll be kind of facilitating that more this week as things wrap up. So I want to do that.
I saw Krishna had a question.
First of all, great work, Jesse. So I'll add my contribution as soon as possible. Was really busy the previous week.
Yeah.
And Bradley and Jesse, did you check out the bias paper that I made the initial draft? I've shared it with both of you. That includes 7 types of bias in AI. So you two please look into it, and we can proceed it further. Submit its preprint.
Well, yeah, I haven't looked at it lately. I think I saw it a while back, but I'll take a look again.
Yeah, I did see it. I looked at it. I think last week, but I haven't touched it with everything else. So I will. We can definitely proceed with that for sure.
Yeah. I think it's I think quite far-fetched, but we should also host a conference sometime at orthogonal lab. Like they have Envision. We can host a conference on AI ethics. Maybe after a few months, we can put it on our bucket list and see where things goes.
Yeah. What is it? What is this again?
And conference on AI ethics.
So an unconference, like kind of like a conference, right?
I know.
Yeah. Like the Envision conference we can host a conference, get called for papers, have workshops, have talks. We can host it. Organize a conference.
Yeah, in fact, we could do that on a smaller scale. If people in the lab wanted to do like 5-minute presentations, we could have like a session where we do like 4 or 5 people, right? But they can do their own. It's a little bit more liberating than a paper because you don't get edited down as much. It's just kind of like your own thing, and So we might talk about doing that at some point too.
Yeah, I actually like the idea. I in my current mindset, I'm like, oh yeah, like frontier map on conference, 2021, and I think we think I think we could do it on like AI ethics related stuff. Also, like there's just like as kind of a follow up to embodiment. Like we could, I don't know what we could have. I mean, we could have as many as we want because we could stop. Well, like it's there. I think the idea of creating and hosting an event like that. That's something I would be interested in actually, particularly not during Neuromatch time, obviously, but like over the summer, there could be some really serious potential for that. I don't know what it would be. I don't know if it would be AI ethics. I don't know if it would be like developmental AI focus, but there's some stuff there that could really.
Or we can diversify the topics. It can be a broad AI related conference, and everyone is welcome. With his talks, we can host. You can say what can poster session where people design one PPT kind of stuff, and they can host it. Then we can have talks. We can have conferences, and we can have a few key speakers. Bradly, you, and you can ask for some collaboration on that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Out for it.
What do you think about that, Erin? Does that sound like something that would be interesting?
Oh, absolutely. I'm having so much fun. Excuse me. I'm having so much fun listening to this. I'm over the moon. This is great.
Good.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
You are over the moon, and Jesse is having a NASA Cup.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said she's over the moon, and Jesse is having a NASA Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and then I have Halo Dot in the background.
Yeah, and your NASA mug, yeah.
Also, like, this is flex. Like, look, I actually have I got some, like, weird buttons to put on my blazers now, and it's the Starfleet Academy Science Team badge. So,
Oh my god!
I'll show you it later, Erin, but, like, I'm totally trying hard today. So, go me. But, I really like the conference idea, and I'm very much, like, in the spirit of creating and outputting and creating spaces. And I was on the verge of it, and it's funny because that Krishna brought it up, because I was thinking about something quite similar to this in spirit, but not like just make the conference yourself. Like that's sort of like the next step. And I was like, yeah, we could do that. So that'd be a whole. I feel like this mix of, and I'm sure Bradly relates. Like I feel this mix of like, oh, that's awesome, and like, holy crap, like I have to schedule that in my life. So like, there's talks to be had, and that could be like, we could have a whole Slack discussion, Slack channel about this, because conferences, as much as like Neuromap is sort of this awesome serendipity and whatever of just stuff coming together, like conferences take some work. But doing them virtually, I think, does make them a little bit easier. So that would be a great conversation to have in the future.
Yeah. So I'd like to switch gears here. I was going to talk about the submissions, but I think we'll take a pass on that for this week. I don't think there's anything coming up other than next weekend. We're going to have Envision and the New York conference. So that's going to, we might just forego having a regular meeting next weekend and instead attend those events and get ready for them. And yeah. So we'll be doing that next weekend, and definitely join us for those things. And we'll be talking more about that in the Slack. And then coming up, I have some revisions to make on our allostasis machines paper. I'm getting there with the talk and like a first draft. So I'll send that out maybe this week for people to review. Danielle is going to take a pass at it, and I want Jesse and Danielle to look at the slides that I'm making for the talk, and then we have to record a talk and submit it by the 18th, I believe. So there's a little bit of time in that, but I want to get that out of the way as quickly as possible. So that's all coming up. So more about that in the Slack. Now I wanted to go to the papers. This is what I promised here earlier in the 2-hour period here. We have I have a lot of things here that I could talk about. One of the things that Erin brought up in her discussions in Slack is the idea of genetic epistemology, or Piaget development. I can't quite get my mouth around that today. So this is I want to bring up two papers just to kind of go over the idea. So this is genetic epistemology and Piaget's philosophy of science. Piaget versus Kuhn on scientific progress. This is a paper I found on kind of giving. We had some discussions a couple weeks ago about like the scientific method and the evolution of the scientific fields. And so we didn't talk about Kuhn and Popper. We talked about Popper a little bit, and we talked about how things change, and we talked about some of the other ideas from philosophy, very broad ideas from philosophy of science. But now, we were talking in the Slack about developmental AI, or developmental, behavior and development and all that. So in this paper, though, it talks about Jean Piaget's philosophy of science, and in particular, the picture of scientific development suggested by his theory of genetic epistemology. So in this paper, they examine genetic epistemology as a theory concerning the growth of knowledge, both in the individual and in science. The second is to explicate Piaget's view on scientific progress, which is grounded in his theory of equilibration. And three, to juxtapose Piaget's notion of progress with Thomas Kuhn's. So they go through this. So this is a lot of like heavy philosophy of science, discussion of this idea of genetic epistemology and all that. So it's interesting how he took this from like child development to the philosophy of science. So we talk about this a little bit here in the paper. So I guess one of the things we're interested in here is this idea of genetic epistemology, a theory on the development of knowledge. So it deals with the genesis of knowledge. But what is its agenda? So the genesis of knowledge is where you have things that are generated sort of de novo. So in development, we are concerned with how does knowledge appear out of a person being born, or a person is an embryo without a active brain, or where a brain is starting to form. How do you go from that to having knowledge? And people have argued that there's some innate features to that. Some people have argued that there's a lot of experience. A lot of it's experience dependent. So we're trying to figure out ways to sort of simulate that or understand that process. And so there's a lot of literature in like developmental psychology, a lot of literature in linguistics, a lot of literature in philosophy that we can draw from on this. And this is on our end, this is far from settled. We need to really kind of think through this aspect. I think we kind of have a certain framework that we're kind of taking with respect to development. And of course, in the other group, we talk about development as sort of a pretty much biological process. But I mean, in our group, we want to maybe talk about some ways in which we can unite sort of the development of like knowledge and other things that brains do with the formation of like brains and bodies themselves. And so I think that's actually where we can add a lot of value to this, because there's a lot of literature on like this sort of thing, but it hasn't necessarily been integrated into things like computational models or larger scale systems that take into account like biology and things like that. So Piaget's bold hypothesis is that the development of knowledge in the individual, which they call ontogenesis, which you'll find in the literature used pretty broadly, draws certain parallels to the development of knowledge in science, or what he calls phylogenesis. Since scientific theories are constructions of the human mind, and all epistemic structures are constructed in similar ways. So this passage is interesting because I've been thinking about we've been talking about the cognition futures and some of the trajectories of certain fields. We've been using this sort of loose phylogenetic language. So I think like one of the things we've talked about, Luca, the last universal common ancestor in our other group, but one of the terms that we might want to use, and we might want to take a phylogenetic approach, is to say that there's this like last common ancestor of certain fields or certain ideas. And so a phylogenetic approach is to take, say there's a common ancestor to say like some language that they're using in cybernetics and some language that they're using in neuroscience, or some language they're using in electrical engineering and some language they're using in neuroscience. They might have a common ancestor in some other term that diverges over time. And so we can use this phylogenetic approach to understand that. And certainly that's where we talk about, he talks about the development of knowledge in science, and it's essentially a phylogenetic approach. That there's this divergence over time, but they have a common origin or common ancestry. And then there's this idea that there's also this ontogenesis that goes on, which is the development of knowledge in the individual. So like, if I read a book, I incorporate ideas into my thinking. And then, so you point to any figure in the history of some field, and they have certain ideas that they develop, and they contribute to a certain field. But then they have other ideas that like Piaget is a good example. I mean, most people know him as a developmental developmental psychologist, say, but many people wouldn't associate him with the philosophy of science. And so there's that, but you're still drawing off of all those ideas. Darwin is another example where he did a lot of work on human muscle as well as evolution. And he did a couple other things too. But, his interests were broader than just kind of what he's best known for. And so, those are things that we can kind of put together as part of these trajectories, that, they're actually not just like historical lists of things and maybe like why we didn't do one thing rather than another. We can actually model these things as both these phylogenetic structures and also these sort of ontogenetic structures, where we look at like, we consider maybe someone maybe they applied some of their other ideas to the field in question. What would happen to the field? Would it go in another direction? Does that make sense? I mean, I've been thinking about this all week, so I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting and very relevant, and I'm curious about. I'm not familiar with that kind of some of the modeling you talk about specifically, but this extremely relevant to the spirit of the projects.
Yeah, I'm just.
Oh. Another phrase. If you're trying to look up stuff on this sort of field, educational psychology, and it sounds like it'd be very elementary, but it actually looks at the fundamentals of human learning and development. So educational psychology might be a good one to throw into the Google as well.
Yeah, like Vygotsky and people like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. yeah, I think that's a good place to go to. And again, we're looking at like very broadly here for a lot of, and actually, people have looked at this before. Like people in CogSci often cite, there's a sort of a standard list of educational psychology people. They cite Vygotsky and a couple other people. So there is that aspect of it. But yeah, well, and I've been going back to some of the stuff for the allostasis machines paper too, because the reviewers asked us to put a little more context together for it. So I've been working on that. Paul Feyerabend, that's a name from Philosophy of Science. His Philosophy of Science is really cool. Yeah, we don't have any papers on him today, but yeah, that's another name in Philosophy of Science. So yeah, that's.
How you spell his name?
What was that?
You spell his name, Bob?
Yeah.
Paul Feyer.
How you spell the name of the Philosophy of Science guy?
It's in the chat. It's listed. Yeah,
okay.
So you can just copy it.
Feyerabend. But we'll put this in the Slack and we'll follow up with this too. So.
Yeah.
I'll put in Discord, Aaron. So.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that, you know, Piaget's ideas about phylogenesis and ontogenesis draws from. So there's some early ideas from Ernst Haeckel, which we've talked about in the Diva-Worm group. Some of these ideas are a bit dated, but, you know, the general connection between phylogeny and ontogeny, or evolution and development, basically, are, you know, I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Especially with respect to ideas. And so this is a very, you know, like most philosophy papers, this is goes into a lot of different issues. So another idea here is that, let's see, Piaget, along with Marx, Comte, and Spencer, believe that all development and evolution has a direction towards an ideal orthogenesis. So these are a lot of the materialists, and, you know, there's an influence there. Orthogenesis, according to Piaget, is a directional tendency as opposed to a final cause or a priori agent directing evolution towards an ideal or optimizing equilibrium between organism and environment. And so there are some, like, I think the general consensus is updated somewhat beyond that in terms of, like, you know, thinking about, like, open-ended evolution or, like, self-organization. I mean, you know, there are things that since this time, you know, where people are kind of thinking about these ideas, but that's something that we can engage with as well. I think there's there's definitely something there. I don't know what it is exactly, but bringing it to the fore, I think, is the key. How do you do that? There's also Piaget also wrote on the isomorphisms between psychogenesis and the history of science. So his idea of, well, they call it psychogenesis. It's essentially the, you know, development of psychology, and then the history of science as well. So there's this link here, Psychogenesis and the History of Science, which is a book from the 1980s, is to demonstrate that the mechanisms mediating transitions and phylogenetic stages are analogous to those mediating transitions and ontogenetic stages. So this is kind of interesting. I don't know exactly, I've not read this book, but the authors attempted to identify the common transitional mechanisms operating in phylogenesis and ontogenesis. I think the idea here is that they're looking at how to, like, identify transitions in sort of the development of ideas. So the rest of this paper goes
the societal brain as well as the individual microcosm. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, I'm not going to go any further into the paper, but if you want to read it, I always make these papers available. Actually, I will put the link to the folder, this week's folder, up in the chat here, and then I also do a Twitter feed afterwards where I post some of these papers directly. So let me go over this. The second paper is, this is the supermoral singularity, AI as a fountain of values. So this is the paper in Big Data and Cognitive Computing. What was that?
I was just saying, yes.
Okay. This article looks at the problem of moral singularity in the development of artificial intelligence. So we are now on the verge of seeing autonomous robots make their own decisions. This will become an integral part of our life. This article presents a qualitative comparative approach which considers the differences between humans and machines, especially in relation to morality, and is grounded in historical and contemporary examples. This argument suggests that it's difficult to apply models of human morality and evolution to machines, and that the creation of superintelligent robots will be able to make moral decisions could have potentially serious consequences. So this is, I think, a lot about the singularity. So, and then in this paper, they actually talk about a lot of these ideas from Piaget. They talk about genetic epistemology. So in this case, it shows how knowledge develops in human beings through cognitive development, a series of stages that people pass through from the early sensory motor stage to maturation, social interaction, and so on. And so this is like sort of an idea. I don't know how we do talk about stages in our framework that we have now, but to talk about maybe stages of acquisition. I think people are talking about this a little bit, maybe not by name, but definitely in spirit. And some of the recent papers that have come out in the AI literature, I'm not going to have time to show them today, but it's largely, I think, a matter of looking at acquisition, which is something that, it's not the only aspect of development, but it's something that, it's definitely different from the idea of, sort of acquisition as like an all or nothing thing. Like if I'm learning a skill, I learn like parts of the skill and I put them together. In this case, they're looking at different stages of developing a skill, acquiring the skill in different pieces. And so, yeah. And then, so this paper kind of goes through this in more of a sort of an application AI approach. There's information about Kohlberg in this paper as well. So, so yeah, this goes into a lot of this. There's it's a focus on ethics, so the ethics team might be interested in covering this paper and going into it a little bit more, maybe for one of the some of the presentations or some of the work that is going on in the
What I would love to do at some point, and I'm kind of looking into next week and maybe the next week after that, but like look at that paper in depth and look at this is sort of like my inception to the lab was talking about the every good regulator theorem.
Yeah.
And there's so much background that I don't think Krishna or Erin or anybody else really has. But when I first came into the lab talking about every good regulator theorem, which is a like old school cybernetics thing from a long time ago, it kind of was this thing that I think Rob Stone and I don't even know what the stats of that thing, but like that was the first thing ever I looked at in the lab, like on my own like interest, and it keeps coming up in different formats. Like I think most explicitly, Carl Friston references it now and then. Like he will mention it by name. Wiesenfeld and Barrett mentions it, and why I'm mentioning it here is because there was this follow-up paper. I don't know if it was like one of the descendants of Ashby or somebody or whatever. I don't know.
Oh yeah, he's like nephew or something.
Do you remember what he said in the email? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was his nephew, and he was doing this ethical regulator work.
Yeah, there was this. So what I was going with is saying, I would love to look at the paper, which is like from Singularity University, and they're very like they're very of a particular mindset about what the singularity is or will be or when it's coming. I like to compare the paper that we just talked about, the supermoral singularity is the title of it, versus that like ethical regulator thing. To kind of see what like do a compare and contrast to that. Because I have not looked in depth into especially the newer paper, so like, it may be a complete bust. But I think that immediately comes to my mind is like, geez, I wonder what that would say. And, that could even be like in theoretical AI ethics conference that we attempt to host in the future. Like that could be. I think it'd be interesting to put a lot of topical points up for like not just a debate, but like let's have a intentional steel manning of these ideas and then see what they can take. Like steel man them and then tear them down kind of a thing. Because I don't like a lot of these sort of ideas that come up around AI ethics and it's like, well this is good, but like okay, what can we do with this concept and like even in terms of like its theoretical, obviously there's a big difference between this theoretical jurisdiction and then the difficulties of implementing anything in reality, whether it's like computationally moving towards interpretability, moving towards explainability, or no less like law than legalizing. So I mean that's a whole chain of thought about it. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
This reminds me of that conversation. Oh, go ahead, Bradly.
Oh, no, you go ahead. I was going to go on to the next thing, but you can. What do you want to say?
Thank you. This past week, Jesse and I in a chat were talking about the idea of, I think it was more on an ethical level, and to people sort of having an influence. And we were talking about systems and sort of that same, like in, I think it's Spanish, there's the phrase la media naranja, the other half of the orange. And there is that sort of fit sort of situation going on. And I'm looking up that good regulator theorem that you talked about, Jesse, and it kind of is reminding me of that, and also sadly of what happened with Margaret Mitchell and then the other lady, and thinking about how potentially they weren't a good fit, not through them not being, you know, a member of the industry, but because Google may be so male and so white, maybe. So they themselves as a regulator of the system didn't fit because the system itself wasn't really representative of humanity. Does that make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
end of tangent.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, well, let me go on to the next couple. Well, we have maybe about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go through some things here. I'm going to share my screen again. And
Sorry for taking a bit more time with some of the stuff.
oh, that's okay. One of the things, Johan John did a tweet this week about
Yes.
tired and wired. So he's, you know, there's this meme, tired. It comes from the Wired magazine where they list things that are tired and then wired. So things that are passé, things that are hip. And so he made this cartoonish list, self-admitted cartoonish list. So classical logic, paraconsistent logic, set theory, category theory, atomism, holism, or systems theory, reductionism, emergence, clockwork causality, causal loops, and so on and on. And this is just an attempt to get like some ideas out there about things that are maybe passé, things that are maybe newer that are supplanting it. I think in some of our discussions, I think these three here, emergence, causal loops, and randomness or chaos are very central to some of the things we talk about. Objects versus processes is another thing. So I want people, I don't want to go too far into this right now, but I think this is grist for some discussion, you know, especially in terms of the cognitive trajectory or cognition futures trajectories idea. That, you know, you have these ideas that are supplanted, these ideas that are maybe tired, and then supplanted by ideas that are wired. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the things that are in this wired category are, like, better. It's just that maybe they're more fashionable, maybe they fit better into the modern discourse. We don't really know. I mean, you could do a whole analysis of this probably. So, I mean, it's just something to think about. We could put this in the Slack if you want, Jesse. Maybe we can talk about it more there. So that's that one. I also want to do one paper before we end the meeting. So I'm trying to figure out which paper I want to do here. Let's see. What is this one? Well, this is actually kind of interesting. So we haven't talked about cultural evolution much. I mean, we've talked about it, but we haven't done like a presentation on it. And so this is an interesting paper that came out recently in Trends in Cognitive Science. This is called Analogy as a Catalyst for Cumulative Cultural Evolution. So this is Paul Smaldino and Alex Masudi. These are people who do cultural evolution. They use a phylogenetic approach specifically to cultural evolution, so they're interested in how you have a common ancestor of something and it diverges, and how you can measure that and look at the evolutionary trajectory of these things. So they kind of talk about cultural evolution and cognitive science and how we should be able to bridge the gap between the two. Those fields are sort of separate as they stand right now, but they're kind of, this paper is kind of an attempt maybe to bring those together, or to talk about analogies as a way to bring them together. So analogies, broadly defined, map novel concepts onto familiar concepts. We know what analogies are, but this is a very common thing in cognitive science and the study of cognition. One of the main areas is through looking at how analogies are built. But we argue that analogy building served as a critical role in the evolution of cumulative culture, which is where you have ideas or practices that accumulate over time. So, like, you know, there's, like, we don't call it collective behavior, we call it cumulative behavior. So, like, you can have a bunch of people doing things in a space, and they sort of add to the pot, so to speak. And that accumulation of things, knowledge or practices, becomes sort of this cultural tradition. That's the idea. And so there's this whole literature on cumulative culture, if you're interested, or cumulative behavior, if you're interested in that. It's basically non-interactive collective behavior. So this is analogy building served as a critical role in the evolution of this by allowing humans to learn and transmit complex behavioral sequences that would otherwise be too cognitively demanding or opaque to acquire. So this is something that actually, if you've heard of cognitive offloading in cognitive science, is the idea that we have too many, sometimes there are things that are too complex to be represented directly in the brain. So we use the environment as a way to like offload some of that. So we can use the environment to, you know, like artifacts or locations in space to sort of augment the brain. So they talk about this emergence of a proto-language consisting of simple labels would have provided early humans with the cognitive tools to build explicit analogies and to communicate them to others. So this is, again, this is the evolution of modern humans, where you have this proto-language of simple labels, sort of a intermediate step between, like, say, formal language and maybe like what came before it. And it's definitely like, you know, this sort of stepping stone between maybe like, you know, the kind of culture that our, you know, ancestral species may have had with what we see in modern humans, which is very rich material culture. So they're trying to make this bridge, you know, within sort of the evolution of humans, but also with cognitive science and how cognitive science looks at like cognition and behavior. And so this focus on analogy building can shed new light on the coevolution of cognition and culture, within addresses recent calls for better integration of the field of cultural evolution with cognitive science. So they do these two things in this paper, and they kind of go through, they talk about social learning, they talk about cumulative culture. This trends, and these trends articles, they often have like these bold terms here: social learning, cumulative culture. They actually they'll have a glossary somewhere in the paper that defines these terms. So that's one of the nice things about the Trends Journal articles, is that they have these, they kind of get at these jargon terms, and they kind of define them, you know, not necessarily in the paper, but you can get easy access to those definitions. So to the extent that cognition is central to cumulative culture, we suggest that analogy should therefore be considered core to cultural evolution too. So they're proposing that we add analogy into the mix, and it's important for a lot of aspects of cognition, including perception and categorization, relational reasoning and abstract representation, learning and reasoning in children, and so on. And so this cultural evolution, you know, typically the field hasn't really dealt with analogy building and things like that, but that they're arguing that it should, and that it's a bridge between the two fields. This is the glossary I was telling you about. So if you're familiar with the cognitive science definition of these terms, you know, this may be familiar to you, there may be new aspects to this, but I think this is nice because when people talk about a term, sometimes they have different definitions of it. So it's good to have the definition right here. And so I don't know how these compare with like a canonical cognitive science view of these terms, but definitely it's going to be different, say, in cultural evolution. In that field, they think about these. Maybe they don't think about these things at all, but it gives a nice basis for that. And so they talk about analogy building as a linguistic exercise. A simple example is instructing a child to cup their hands to hold water by saying the single word cup, rather than dictating the precise arrangement that their fingers and hands must make. So this is, again, like ways that we use language. We use analogies to build language, and then those things evolve according to this cultural evolution model, or according to this phylogenetic model more specifically. So this actually fits well into human evolution, where, you know, we're building these systems, but also within like an individual, or like maybe 2 or 3 generations of humans, where you're trying to teach children something and you're using these techniques to do so. So they talk about analogical reasoning, they talk about other issues, they talk about human evolution specifically, they talk about Homo erectus, the evolution of Homo erectus, the transition from Homo erectus to archaic Homo sapiens, and then modern Homo sapiens. And a lot of that is generally speculation, but it's interesting to think about it. So they have a diagram here, stages of proto-language relevant to analogy building, so they consider this from sort of a proto-language standpoint. So this isn't like a formal natural language, but this is sort of a proto-language which our ancestors may have used. And so they put that together. And then they ask, is analogy building unique to humans? So this is often the thing we, you know, our perspective on developmental AI or developmental simulation is that we want to generalize it across animals broadly. And so in doing so, we have to consider, is analogy building unique to humans? And it's probably not, but there may be human specific things that are happening. And so the question is, you know, how do we go more, how do we generalize beyond humans? If we're interested in intelligence, even if it's like a specific type of intelligence, how do we generalize beyond humans? How do we avoid the human-centric bias? But how do we also understand what things are unique to humans, what things may be unique to other species, and understand that as part of, maybe that gives us more information about what intelligence is and what intelligence isn't. So that'll help us in our definitions, in our framework. So this is I think this is a very good paper. I'll leave it in the folder. You can look at it on your own. I think this would be very good to follow up on in terms of like some of the Cognition Futures stuff, but also the developmental AI stuff, where we're thinking about like very general framework, but we also have to be mindful of those, you know, what is it about, like, what do we want to achieve with an intelligent system? You know, do we want to, you know, it's maybe, you know, general AI isn't really where we want to go. We want to be able to have a generalizable framework, but we may want to address certain problems in intelligence. You know, in intelligent systems, they can't just be broadly intelligent necessarily. They have to be targeted to certain domains.
Yeah. There's a lot there.
Octopi and crows.
Yeah, definitely. And there's been a lot of work on crows and in other animals that are like other animal models or other birds that are very highly intelligent, and they've actually looked at like tool building in tool making in crows, and they've done so I mean there's a lot there that you can learn as well about like acquisition of things and cultural artifacts and this sort of cumulative culture.
I would like to find a study in college, not just tool making, but like I know they can. I think with across generations they can identify like a threat, like that person with the red hat, you know, like that. If they see someone they're not, like, the transferring, not just doing it, but like the transferring of the knowledge as well into like collective cognitive offloading, you know, and like being able to like access that. But that's really something, and I feel like. Even in the sense of, I think, yeah, there's a lot of things to say about this. There's like so many, I'm just making notes.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll revisit this, and I would like to do a talk on cultural evolution at some point, but not in the near future, because we have a lot of things coming up. And so the most immediate things are going to be the next weekend. We're going to have the Envision Conference and the New York Celebration of Women in Computing, and those will be during this session. So we won't be having this session next week, and I hope to see the people from this group and that group, and we'll be spreading the word about the lab and so forth. And then the following week we'll have a regular meeting time. So we'll maybe bring some of these issues up we'll also talk about the allostasis machines paper and perhaps some other things that we need to, because there are some other deadlines towards the end of the month that we need to be aware of by then.
So I might say one phrase to kind of capture something. Yeah, let me write this first. So I think one thing about developmental AI that I've been thinking about since the Embodied Intelligence workshop has been, how do we relate? It's almost like, not quite like first and second order cybernetics, but like, what if we're looking at developmental AI, do we want to focus on specifically the agent and its development of the nervous system or whatever, like Brain Vehicle Plus, you know? That's one thing, but like, there's like, if to kind of be a little bit more encompassing, you could say, oh, well, the agent and its interactions with the environment and the environment shaping on it. Okay, yes, that's developmental influence. And I think sort of, depending on how complex and robust we want to be about it, like, well, also there's the cognitive offloading stuff of creating these, an agent developing in an environment, and maybe that environment has developed enough where there has been cognitive offloading and creation of stuff and learning and you know, that sort of, you know, like whales teach stuff to their kids and crows teach things, and obviously we teach things, and this kind of goes into, actually this circles all the way back to what I was saying. This is like a huge thing about social learning, even like MIT's like very conscious social learning, social robotics, whatever. Okay, but also just like this. It's one of our developmental AI. I think it might be on the GitHub, but like how parents are sort of donating their time and their resources downward, like they're donating this time and energy and resources and creating these facilitative processes for cognitive offloading to the kids to have these resources, like things, almost like things, I'm going to use this term very loosely, but like almost things they could have in an afforded sense, to like baby food digestion of cognitive offloading. Hey, here's how you can manipulate this thing that we've cognitively offloaded, you know, like that kind of a thing. So that's very loose set of thoughts.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a loose set of thoughts, and it's sort of like I don't know how much you've been exposed to this, but like we're developing something called like developmental AI as a framework for understanding, you know, stuff in like kind of progressive and more robust and more generalized things in AI in the lab. And this is kind of some stuff to follow up on later, and stuff I've been taking notes on. So I know we have to go now, but just kind of as a further research and ideas in this path.
Yeah, there are loads of ideas, so maybe we'll, you know, we can put some of those in Slack and we can follow up on some of them. But definitely, yeah, keep your notes handy, and you know, maybe we can push on some of this in future meetings and maybe come up with some ideas for some of our upcoming submissions. So, well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Erin, for attending, and Krishna and Jesse, as always. We'll be on Slack throughout the week, and then we'll see you next weekend at the workshops that are happening.
Great. And fun. Glad to see everybody.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Talk to you later. Have a good week.
Bye, Jesse.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.